All right,
Hello,
guys. Oh, sorry.
welcome to Onderl Academy. Today's presenter is Squire Igua. He'll be teaching us how to make a blue right for you. All right, Igua, take it away.
All right, guys. So, I'm sure you guys have, to some extent, had a loner weapon in your hand, right? Um, Loner weapons are typically not made to feel comfortable. They're not made to, be particularly good weapons. And a lot of times you'll get people saying like, "Oh, well, they're cheap, so that because they're loners." But cheap swords can actually be really good. The build that I make for myself and that I've made for other people who have asked them to be tournament bats, it costs me about 12, like anywhere from $10 to $14 in materials, depending on how fancy you want to get with it. And I typically buy things in like bulk so that I can crank out a lot of swords because people break things. They make for great loaners. I keep a few in my bag just in case someone wants to use one. And so this will kind of be a class on getting you guys used to making your own swords and kind of getting a feel for and like getting you conscious of what you want in a sword. Um, so the first thing is the core. You can't make a sword without one in Belagarth. There's a few rules. It cannot be metal. You can't just have a steel spike that you picked out of a railroad, put some foam around it, and hit someone with it. That would hurt. There's two real main cores that we see a lot in Bell, golf club and kitespar, at least for blues. If anyone tells you PVC, they're lying. That's not real. So this right here, and I know it's a little hard to see, but this is going to be kitespar. This is exactly 1/2 inch in diameter, which is really good because a lot of sword building is just putting numbers together. They usually, from where I order them, they come in, I think, what is it? It's like 60 inches or something like that. Which with this, I can typically get 2 or 3 decent sized weapons out of. Sorry. This is roughly $10 a core. Sometimes they can go on sale, but not always. Or you can also take in someone else's like old sword that's broken, and a lot of times it will be kitespar. And if you feel like taking the time, you can scrape all the old junk off and repurpose it into a new sword that's a really good core. This is really sturdy. I've never broken one. People who say that they break these all the time must swing with the arm of like Hercules or something, because it doesn't break unless you want it to break. And I like this a lot because it doesn't taper like the other core we're going to talk about. It's flush all the way down, which makes it really easy for measurements, which we'll get into the measurements later. The other core is a golf club. As you can see, it's ready to go, but no. So typically, you'll find a bunch of different golf clubs. Best place that I've ever found them is at Goodwill. If you go, they're usually on like a bottom shelf near like toys or sports equipment, and you can find a ton of them. You got to be careful about what you pick, but you can go to Goodwill and get them for like $3. So this $3, the other one $10. If you're on a budget, this is your best bet. Now, obviously, you have to saw off the head. Just take any hacksaw, cut it. I usually just cut it off as close to the head as possible. I don't know, let's see. Yeah, so you want to get right below where the black is. Just saw it off. You can worry about measuring it out to your size later, but this way you get as much core to work with as possible. The other thing, and this is up to you guys, but it does come with this like wrap around it. It's rubbery. If it's old, it'll be flaky and kind of gross. Now, there's two ways to go about the wrap. Some people just take a knife, go straight down, and then peel it off, and then it's just all of this aluminum straight down. I actually like to leave it on because I like my weapons back weighted. And this is just more weight that you can cover up with handle. And for me, at least in my opinion, the most important part of the sword is your handle. That's where you're going to get the feel of the weapon. The blade should come out pretty much carbon copy every time, as long as you're making your cuts right. But the handle is where you really get to customize how your sword feels for you. Now, weighting and stuff is the next step. I don't have any of the materials with me because I haven't built it in a long time, and I didn't want to go to Home Depot. So I'm going to put some pictures in the chat. There's tons of different ways you can weight a sword. Um, I've seen people use heavy ropes. I've seen people use something actually really interesting called plumber's putty, and it's kind of like a combination of Play-Doh and silly putty that you can kind of just stuff into like the back of your sword. Um, Personally, I think the best way to weight a sword is 3/4 inch nuts. You can go to Home Depot, buy a box of like 4 dozen for like $15. They look like this. Da, 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 da. How do I?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Maybe a obscure way to weight a sword that I just found because I have a bunch of old swords, and I discovered that I have one that's back weighted using sand in the inside of the core itself. Obscure. I have found it ineffective.
I have also heard of people doing that with sand, pebbles. I've heard of. Yeah, and then I've also heard an old one of people adhering pennies to your pommel on the inside of the foam and then wrapping the pommeled penny foam around. Uh, we're not heathens here, so we're gonna do things in a civilized manner and used pre-cut 3/4 inch nuts because they're simple and cost effective.
I once took apart a Castorbat and bought Taco Bell with it.
Yeah, I've heard, I heard that
I
story.
swear to God, on my heart, dude.
Let's see here. Let me find this picture really quick. Here we go. So in the chat, I posted a picture of what the nuts will look like. They're not that big. If you're looking at your core, they usually are about this thickness. What's nice about them is you can kind of just slide them onto your core, tape them down, and bam, you have counterweight. Now, I'm going to give most of this tutorial on kitespar, just because for me, it's easier for the math. But the math isn't very different when it comes to golf club. It's also just easier to demonstrate. So when you have your counterweight, whatever it is, in this case, we're using the 3/4 inch nuts. What you're going to do is you're going to slide them on. This is now your pommel, okay? So you're going to slide them on however many you want for counterweight. I personally use 3. For other people, I tend to use 2 when I'm building for someone else, just because different people like different handles, and I know my personal like build for me is different from other people's. But so let's go with the number 2. We're going to be using 2 3/4 inch nuts. They are going to stack up, and what you're going to do is you're going to put them on. If they slide around, so like a lot of times this will happen with golf club or kitespar, but the nut will have a little bit bigger hole than the core. Take them off. You're going to take duct tape and just wrap around where they're going to go, just enough so that you can tightly screw them on, because you don't want them to move around. You want your metal parts of the counterweight to not move. But basically, you just screw them on so that they're snug, and then you'll take more duct tape and you're just going to wrap around a few times until they're really, really secure. I like to start with the handle because the sword, I use the exact same dimensions for the actual foam cuts of the sword every single time. From there, you're going to want to measure out how much handle you want. And you also want to take into consideration Belagarth rules of how much handle you're allotted. My safe bet number is I go 8 inches up from where the counterweight ends, and that's where I will leave my handle. And you want to use a Sharpie just to mark off everything. That way it's simple.
For those of you at home or in the video that are interested, the length there in the Book of War is 12 inches or 1/3 of the weapon, whichever is greater for a blue.
Right. And I typically don't like going a whole lot of handle, but it's always up to you. Just make sure you look at the Book of War, build according to the rules. But also remember, the more handle you have, the more back weighted it's going to be. So if you like a little tip heavier of a weapon, keep that in mind. You can use less counterweight, you can do less handle. It's all up to you. From there, you have it marked where your handle ends. The rest of this, whatever you have marked out, is going to be your blade. I usually build for a 34-inch bat. For me, that's basically the standard. It's a very simple measurement. And yeah, after that, you're going to use a material called carpet tape. This is awesome stuff. It's incredibly lazy and incredibly inexpensive. I think I usually get it for like $1.50, $2 a roll, and a roll will last you probably like 4 or 5 swords. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that carpet tape, and from where the counterweight ends to where your handle ends, you're just going to carpet tape both sides. From there, you're going to need some kind of rope. It can be paracord, it can be rope, it can be yeah, like what Carps just showed was perfect. It can really anything just to make a comfortable grip for yourself. Because the thinner the handle, the more painful it is on your hands. If you fight a long time with a thin handle, it's going to really wear down on the joints on your fingers. So it doesn't have to be super duper thick, but at least I think the rope that I use, paracord is thin, so paracord can make it a little painful. So you might want to do 2 wraps of the paracord. Personally, I use a rope that you can get at Home Depot. And it's not a thick rope. I don't know if I have any. Oh, actually, I'm stupid. I have handles over here. It's going to end up looking like this, but this yellow stuff is the rope that I use. You can buy it at Home Depot. It's nice and soft. I think it's just a cotton rope. And you just wrap it along with the carpet tape. What the carpet tape does is it's a double-sided tape that adheres very well to fabric. So it'll hold the rope down basically, no worries. And you just want to wrap it tightly. It does get a little painful in your hands. So if you switch hands or something, it's fine. But you're just going to wrap it. And then you can see here where I started it and where I ended it, I just wrapped once with athletic tape. And there's a lot of different tapes involved. The main ones are duck, carpet, and athletic. Or sports tape, it's also called. You can get it at like Walmart for super cheap. And then after that, we're going to get to the pommel. Now, again, these are swords that I make for myself. So these are my personal measurements. You can play with it however you want. But this pommel is 2.5 inches in width. And I believe it's a 7-inch length strip of 4-pound foam. It's also called stamina mat or puzzle mat. I'll put links in the chat later for places where you can order stuff or buy stuff. But this is essentially called 4-pound foam. Foam is typically measured in different like grades of poundage, or a lot of people you'll hear the words L200, L300, stuff like that. This is the equivalent of L400 foam. Now this is the cheap version that you can go to a Big Lots or a Big Five, and it's just like the weightlifting mat. You just that is 4-pound foam, and that's the cheap version. Puzzle mat is also 4-pound foam. that you can get. I know Carps gets really good puzzle mat. I don't know from where.
I get mine. It depends if I need a large quantity or not, but if I need just something for a quick project, they sell them for like $3 at a place called Five Below that's local to Southern California. I don't know if it's got more places, but I do know Southern California. Five Below,
Yeah.
you get one piece of puzzle mat.
Yeah, and so puzzle mat is really good. It's a little bit thicker than stamina, like the weightlifting mats, um, but it works just the same. It's the same gradient of foam, and the reason you want that is because it's nice and dense but still soft. It has some give. Um, that way, whenever you're holding your sword, I know most of us will squeeze into the pommel a little bit, and you don't want to use a higher density foam because it's going to start feeling like plastic, and that's going to start hurting. Um, 5L500 or 5 pound foam is the densest I would ever use on a sword. Um, I know that people have used like L600, which is 6 pound foam, and at that point, that's stuff that cosplayers will carve into for stuff, and that's basically like foam plastic. It doesn't feel great. But all you're gonna do is you're gonna take more carpet tape. You're gonna wrap that around your nuts, and then take that 2 or 3 inch by 7 inch and just wrap it real tight once. After that, go over it one more time with athletic tape, and it should be pretty solid. From there, just take the bottom of it, put it on top of your 4 pound foam, trace it, cut that out, carpet tape it right to the bottom. And that's going to be the cap to your pommel. Now, this whole thing is covered in soft, squishy foam. You could never tell that there is metal nuts in there. And obviously, you're not hitting anyone with the pommel, but you want to make sure it's still padded. Now, from there, the sword should look like this. This is like the base of where my handle starts. At this point, I'll start putting together the blade, and the blade is just simple math. If we're using kitespar, a kitespar core is 1/2 inch. So we're gonna start. Let me go over this real quick. So there's different parts of the blade. Obviously, there's the core. Out from the core, you have the box. The box is the foam directly touching the core, and you want to make sure that this is cut out as precise as possible, because with this build, there's going to be gaps, and as long as you have the cuts the right size, those gaps won't matter, and the box will hold stable. Now, the measurements are going, and I'll post the measurements later, but the measurements are basically going to be 1/2 inch wide by the length of your blade. So obviously they kind of look like blue French fries. You'll have the first two be exactly that, 1/2 inch wide by the length of the blade. I believe this is 20 inches. Your second half of the box, which is where what's going to go on this flat side, if I can cover up. The second half of the box is going to be a little bit different because you want it to also touch the other two pieces of foam just a little bit. So the second half is actually going to be 3/4 inch by length of blade. That way it's touching both sides of the foam as well as the core, and there's not going to be any give. It's going to be very, very solid. I've hit myself with just the box, and sometimes, depending on how it comes out, it would pass a hit for Belagarth. Foam does this weird thing where when you cut it, it changes the way that it gives. And with this foam, blue foam in particular, the thinner the pieces, the more of a pillow it is. So, yeah. Before you adhere them on, which I kind of forgot to talk about, every core is going to have an uncomfortable, really hard tip. It's going to be kind of jagged because that's probably where you sawed it off. So you have to biscuit it. A biscuit is basically a covering for the tip of your core so that it doesn't damage the foam, doesn't puncture the foam, and most importantly, doesn't stab somebody like a prison shank. Most simple biscuit is just take a piece of foam about the size of the head of about the size of your core, put it on, duct tape it down. That's all this is. Really simple. Yes, Carbs.
I have a question. So I personally make my biscuits actually like larger than the tip of the foam by like maybe, I don't know, like a half inch or so. What is your preference on that? Do you make it much larger? I kind of like do like a mushroom where I compress it down.
It just kind of depends on the sword I'm making. If I'm using golf club, I'll go a little bit bigger, because the mushroom actually helps kill the taper on a golf club, and it makes it a little more flush when you're making your cuts. For those of you who can't really see well, a golf club towards the back of the handle will be a lot thicker, and it gradually gets thinner and thinner to the core. So if you make a bigger biscuit, it'll make it feel a little more flush, and your box will stick better. For kitespar, I will always use the clean cut of kitespar as the tip of the sword, so that I don't have to worry about it being as jagged. Because wherever I saw it, it's obviously going to be more jagged, even if I sand it down. And I'll sand down the tip as well. Always sand your tips because sharp.
I also find that doing a larger biscuit on the top, if you're using a tapered core, will stop the rattle if you're using tubes as fry.
Okay. Yeah, I don't typically tube build. But yeah. So after you biscuit it, and then for kitespar cores, I'll go just a little bit bigger. But I'll tape it downwards first, so that it kind of like mushrooms itself naturally, but not like a whole lot, just because I don't want to kill the nice flushness of the kitespar. After you biscuit, then you'll use DAP. I'll also post a link of what DAP is. It is a contact cement. I'm sure most everyone in this chat has heard of DAP at some point, but just in case, DAP is a brand. What you're looking for is DAP contact adhesive, and there's two different kinds. One will come in a green can, the other will come in a red can. Use the red can. The green can does not work for what we do. The green can will basically just be soupy and gross and not stick to anything. Red can, and how you use it is you'll DAP the two things you want to stick together. So typically how I do it is I'll DAP the whole core all the way around, and then I'll DAP one side of the box piece, and you'll just DAP that, let them dry. You want to wait for it to start feeling kind of like tacky, not like completely dry, but dry enough to where it doesn't stick to your fingers, but your fingers kind of have a little pull. Kind of the same consistency as if you spilt like a juice box. That's generally about what you're looking for it to be ready. So then you'll lay the piece on, lay the next piece on, and from there you'll just DAP this side again. The only difference is you'll also DAP the side of the blue foam on the flat, so that when you lay your next piece down, it sticks to the foam as well. DAP basically sticks to itself, so that'll kind of give you a good idea on where you want to put it. And also, as a warning, if you are using DAP, wear clothes that you don't care about. DAP stains, and it stains everything. It does not come off your clothes ever. Also, yeah, that's a good point. If you're using DAP, it does have fumes. If you're building in a garage, make sure you have good ventilation. I once posted a picture of, I believe I made like 13 swords in my living room without the fan on, and it was it was a bad time. So don't do that. Build with ventilation. Outside is always best. Just just know that anything that DAP touches, it pretty much won't come off of. That includes like cement and wood. So it'll stain stuff. So just be careful with it. And from there, you'll just put your next piece on, and it'll look kind of like this. And I don't know if you guys can see very well, but this is going to be the half-inch piece that we first adheted, and then this will be the thicker piece, and it's touching both of the other sides of the blue foam. And that right there is the box. Very simple. Let's see if it still hits nice. Yeah, I felt people pass swords that are worse than that. So, if you build right, your swords hit nicely, and that's the important thing. From there, the next step is really easy. the measurement is again going to be the length of your blade, and the width is going to be 8 to 8.5 inches. And this is going to be the actual blade of your sword. This one's a little weird. Let me see it. Did I bring it? Yeah. So it'll come out looking like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick one of the lengths on your box. You're going to dap that, and then you're going to dap the whole big ass thing that's going to end up being your blade. Now you're going to get this, and you're also going to dap one of these edges, because how it's going to end up being is you're going to wrap it slowly, and eventually you're going to have the edge come in like this, and it'll be sticking to the other part that you dapped. And this guarantees a really nice seal. And as long as it dried correctly and it dapped on correctly, the blade's not going anywhere. The foam will die before the blade unattaches itself, which I don't know if you guys have ever weapons checked, but a lot of times that can be a problem, where basically you have your box and you have your blade, but they have become unattached, and so the blade just kind of spins around the box inside of the cover, and it's really weird. From there, your blade is pretty much done, and your last step is just capping it. Do I have one here? I don't. So the idea of a cap is that it is your stab tip. Now, you don't have to build a stab tip, but there's no point to not build a stab tip. Because even if you're not going to stab, it makes for a safer sword tip. Now, this is what a completed actual blade looks like. And you can't see it because it's underneath this junk. But the stab tip is going to basically be, you take the tip of your sword, put it over 4-pound and trace it, and then put it over blue foam and trace it. You're going to cut out 1 disc of 4-pound, 1 disc of blue foam, and the last one is going to be yoga mat. And yoga mat is super duper squishy. It's super duper nice. And basically what you're going to do is, in this order, you're going to dap down to the tip: black foam, blue foam, yoga mat. And what that does is it creates a tip like this, where it has 3 layers protecting you from the core. It's really soft, it's really nice, and it lasts a while. After that, yeah, Carps?
Have you ever used linen between your cap and the core?
I've heard of that. I've actually heard that what people typically do will dap the linen, like make it really, really dapped up so that it hardens a little bit, and then stick it down between the layers of the first layer of foam and the core. I've never done it because I don't typically have fabric I keep around, because I don't sew. But I mean, I've heard it works well.
So the basic principle of that is that the core itself, as you swing, moves. The tip shifts from the core. So if you ever notice, after you you get a tip that shears off or something, if you turn it upside down, you'll have like bits of foam that is kind of like carved out in like a circle. Over time, that's what happens. So the linen, if you put it on top, it stops that shaving of the foam over time.
The other thing that helps it is actually this build in particular, because what happens is when you have the 2 thin pieces, these are stuck to the core, but this big piece is stuck to both the core and the 2 small pieces, and the core has nowhere to move. Regardless of if it tapers or not, the core is basically stuck here, and the only thing that has a potential to move is these gaps right here, where the blade will create. But if you dap everything down really nice and tight, those gaps won't move. So that's kind of been my workaround about tips getting blown out. That combined with the next step of, after you've wrapped your blade, you've put on your stab tip. Next, you're going to use simple packing tape. The thicker it is, the harder your sword will slap. So kind of just gauge that. I like using thinner tape, but I also don't hit very hard. Hopefully, so it doesn't really matter. But don't use like the super duper thick packing tape, because at that point it's gonna hurt. And you're just gonna take a strip, go down, go down, go down, go down, until your entire length of your sword is covered in packing tape. Some people like to go over the stab tip with their packing tape. That's just kind of preference. I haven't found it to make my tips last any longer, but I've found that it does make the stab hurt more. So I personally don't do it. But it's not like it'll fail. It's just a tomato kind of thing, like whatever you prefer. After that, what you're gonna do is there's foam that you can buy from Walmart. Best one is adhesive foam. That way you don't have to dap it down yourself. It's literally just a sticker. And you just cut it whatever width you like. I like doing one of them wide. Sorry. So this pink one is a little bit wider. I think it's like 3 inches. And it's 3 inches by the length of the foam. And you just start it somewhere and kind of gently stretch it around. It usually goes around 1 or 2 times. And I usually do that with anywhere from 2 to 3 pieces of foam, of the foam. What this does is it keeps your tip from wobbling. The worst way I've seen it blow out is where the stab tip starts peeling off from so many hits, right? It'll get hit, and it'll start bending. But the foam is oddly sturdy, so it keeps it from doing that too much. It'll make your sword last that much longer. And at that point, the blade of your sword is done. It's a really simple build. And that's where, for me at least, the fun part comes in. Now, let me go back to this one. You have your basic handle that you had. This is wrapped with, again, just some cotton rope that I bought from Home Depot. But whatever you wrap it on, you should always have it kind of be this base, because this is the best starting area for determining how heavy you want your weapon. And this is where like the weirder counterweighting stuff comes in. A lot of people will just take duct tape to the pommel, wrap it in duct tape until it feels comfortable for them, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it makes for really chunky, kind of like wonky looking pommels. And I like things feeling clean. I like things feeling comfortable. So my go-to, and I don't have it with me, you can buy it at Walmart. I think you also buy it pretty much like at any like a hardware store, but it's magnetic tape. It's very malleable. The magnetic part is pretty worthless, but it is it's really dense and heavy. And so it makes for really, really good counterweight. And I'll post links to this in the chat. But what I like to do is take the magnet tape, and I usually do about 1 or 2 wraps. And if you can see this pommel, it kind of looks like the pommel tapers. And that's because this is where the pommel foam was initially cut off. And all of this over here is magnet tape. It's not that hard. It's pretty much the same feel as like 5 or 6 pound foam, which is fine for a pommel. And it's squishy enough so that it actually squeezes with the foam. But it makes for super nice counterweight. So for me personally, the important part of a sword is where you can see where the balance point is. Without the cover, it's a little tip heavy. It's right about here is where the weight is. And for me, that's perfect. You guys will come to find whether you like things more back weighted or tip heavy, and that will play into your fighting. A tip heavier sword will hit harder. Your follow through will be a little bit have more force behind it. It'll also put a little bit more strain on your wrist. So if you don't have strong wrists, keep that in mind. Back heavier weapons won't hit as hard, but you'll have a quicker return. You'll have more control of your weapon. So it's kind of just dependent on your fighting style as well. The other thing that took me a lot of building to actually figure out, when you're making your weapon, keep in mind how heavy your gloves are, or if you don't wear gloves. Your gloves play into the counterweight of your sword. I think my fighting gloves are about 3 ounces, so that's 3 more ounces of back weight to my sword. Yes, carbs.
Mine are 4.2 ounces
Yeah.
each,
Uh,
of course.
yeah, and I know there's different kinds of gloves. If you have one of the big, thick hockey gloves, I think those things are like 6, 7 ounces. So keep that in mind when you're making your sword, because the more back weighted it is, you're not gonna be hitting as hard. Um, so if you're someone who has a problem with people taking your shots because you hit too light, or they say you hit too light, obviously, um, consider maybe not putting as much back weight in, but getting a heavier glove or something like that. But gloves do play into it. If you see, this is a kitespar cord, that's why it doesn't taper like the other ones. Um, my comfort grip is like about here for not hurting my wrist. This is where I typically fight, but this is a tip heavy sword for me with my glove on, just barely tip heavy. If you're making a sword that you want to be back weighted, golf club in general might just be your better option, because look at how much thicker the handle is going back. And I'll put them up to each other to compare. But this it's the same rope, by the way. I don't know if you can see, but it's the exact same rope, but this one is almost twice as thick at the base. Golf club will naturally end up being more back weighted and lighter, so you have a little bit more room to play with where you want the weight. After that, the only other thing to consider on the weight and like the feel of your sword is your cover. I don't make my own covers. I'm really lazy, so I like to go to Walmart. They have they're called tube socks. You'll usually find them in the ladies' footwear section. But nylon tube socks, just they even come in patterns sometimes. But just slip one over your sword. They're really lightweight covers. You just adhesive tape it down, and bam, you have a sword cover. Or if you're like Carps and you like to make stuff, where did it go? No, right here.
Would you like me to tell you them my preference? Oh, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. So Carps made this cover for my sword like a year ago. Um, this is a material called Ripstop Nylon. It is the same exact sword cover material that Gore-Tex uses on their $90 bats. And this is almost entirely what you're paying for. Their sword build does not last that long. The reason their swords feel so good is because of this cover. I said what I said. There's no point in paying for a $90 bat that'll last the same amount of time or less than one of these swords. And this is the same build that we're going to be using for our new loner weapons in Korriban. And if if you guys have run a realm, you know that you want your loner weapons to last as long as possible, because rebuilding loner weapons is a pain in the ass. This is entirely what you're paying for those secret bats, and you can get it at Joann's. It is slightly pricey. Is it $5 a yard?
It's like $5 a yard ish, and then
Oh,
there's
okay. Okay, yeah. So then it's not even like that bad, and you don't need that much of it. I don't know a good. I mean, I don't know exactly how to sew a sword cover. Carp sews my sword covers when I ask him to. But this ripstop nylon is really nice. They have a lot of colors, so you can make them kind of custom. Or if you want to tip heavier weapon, this is really lightweight. If you want to tip heavier weapon, use a heavier material. Don't go too heavy, because then it's going to thunk and that doesn't feel good. But things like linen or cotton will be heavier than this and give you a little bit more tip on your sword. The length of the blade determines how much weight you're getting from your sword cover. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And then the last bit is, what are we going to cover the rope on the handle with? People like a ton of different things. To kind of give you a feel for how you're holding your sword. Some people just leave it as the rope. That's fine. That passes. Some people will athletic tape over it to give it a little more grip. personally, um, depending on what you're using, if it's a golf club core, because they taper, I don't want it to get that much chunkier because I don't like super thick handles. So I'll use a tennis grip um, that you can buy, at any place, pretty much Walmart, Target, sports stores. But a simple tennis grip will do wonders for how the sword feels in your hand. They're also nice and squishy, so they help your joints not hurt as much, and they'll give you really good grip on your weapon. If you want to get really fancy, and if you're building on kitespar in particular, a baseball overgrip, which is what it's not the extra grip that you can wrap around your baseball bats, but it's the base grip that typically comes on a baseball bat. Uh, that has felt the best to me. It's thick, it's really dense rubber, um, and it fits perfectly in my hand with this build, as well as it's not going anywhere. Like you have such a good grip with it, um, that it feels great, and it's also really nice and soft on the inside, so it feels good on your joints. And there's a ton of different grips you can get. There's also tennis over grips, which are similar but a little thinner. Um, if you think of any sport that uses some kind of like racket or bat, um, typically you'll be able to find different types of grips. Those are the ones that I would recommend if you want to get a little fancy with it. Otherwise, just leaving it as the rope or just athletic taping over it for a simple, quick build is perfectly fine, and it'll feel good. And besides that, that's pretty much the sword build. There's different variations of it, and at this point, if anyone wants to ask questions about how to customize their sword or like, you know, theories on like what would feel more comfortable for you, feel free to ask. And I'll put all the measurements and all the cuts and stuff. Um, I'll make a document and put that in the chat, or I'll put that on the page.
So we're open to questions. Anybody have any questions at all? You're free to type in the chat, or just speak directly to Igua here. Igua's available here to talk. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. Did you want to go first?
No, I want you to go first. But I will ask questions if nobody asks questions.
All right, gotcha. In that case, what would you recommend for crossguard?
Crossguards are cool. I actually think that Carps made some of the nicest ones that I felt, and it was, if I remember right, it's a piece of corrugated plastic, which political season just ended. This is the perfect time to steal political signs because that's just corrugated plastic. Take your local Trump sign, turn it into a nice usable core instead of a piece of garbage on someone's lawn. And what to do is you just cut it out in the shape that you want your crossguard to be. And the corrugated plastic is the one you want to do first. Typically use two layers, just so it's nice and sturdy. And you'll dap it together. Just, dap is like one of the easiest to use contact adhesives. So you'll dap the two pieces together. And then from there, you'll trace those over 4-pound foam. And you'll put the two pieces of 4-pound foam around and then just wrap the edge.
Kind of make a quick suggestion to everybody. When using corrugated plastic, whenever you're stacking it on top of each other, do it like crisscross. That'll strengthen your corrugated plastic. Because if you do it in the same direction, how corrugated plastic bends, it'll just bend the whole crossguard. If you do it as a crisscross, it'll resist itself. So,
yeah. But from there, you'll just, after you have your two corrugated plastic pieces, you'll put your two foam pieces and sandwich them, and then just put a rim around it. After that's all dapped down, from there, the cool thing is you can actually really customize it. If you just want to cut into it with a knife, or if you want to use a wood burner, a Dremel, you can really like kind of carve in some designs on your crossguard. And from there, I would plasti dip it just so that it's sealed and nice. Plasti dip is a spray that basically has a weird reaction with foam and that it turns it almost into a rubber-like substance. The other cool thing about plasti dip is that after you plasti dip it, you can really easily paint your foam. So if you want to make a nice, pretty crossguard, you'll put all the pieces together, plasti dip it where the foam is, Carbs, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would want to plasti dip after you do all carving, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you plasti dip after you've done all your carving.
So you'd
gap sealing or whatever.
Yeah, if you have like gaps where the foam meets the plastic or whatever, you definitely want to put some E6000, which is just a sealant. You can also use plumber's putty, which I talked about earlier. It kind of works the same way. After that, then you'd put plastic dip, which is a sealant, and it'll seal everything. Then you can paint over the plastic dip and then spray it down one more time with a clear coat, pretty much. And you'll have a nice, pretty cross guard. Carbs has made some really cool ones.
You
yeah.
can use silicone as a gap sealer, as a fun fact.
Oh, there we go. That's the one.
Plasti dip will not adhere to silicone.
And then the other thing is to consider where your crossguard is sitting on your weapon. It will add weight. So typically crossguards are right where the blade meets the handle. You're holding below the crossguard, so it's going to add more tip weight to where you're holding the sword. So just keep that in mind. If you make a really, really heavy one, but you like a back-weighted sword, you'll just have to back-weight your sword with the nuts and with whatever you decide to use. I'll put links for like the magnet tape and some other stuff that I've used that's really well. There's also tennis players actually use something called aluminum tape, and it's really soft aluminum that they wrap around the base of their racket so that they have more control over it. I've tested that out and it works kind of well. The only thing is the aluminum tape is a little expensive for how much you get from it. So, keep that in mind. Were there any other questions?
Oh, I lost my question. Is there anything that you are currently experimenting with or have thoughts on maybe wanting to test out as like innovation to your build?
Yeah, so my build, I always use blue foam, which I didn't really say this, but blue foam is a camping mat that you can get from Walmart. It's really inexpensive. The only issue with blue foam is that it's actually cut slightly irregularly. It's not 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. I think it's the like thickness of the blue foam is just under 1/2 inch. And sometimes it's just over because of how they make the mats. So now that I've been in the sport, and since if I'm building for myself or if I'm building for other people, not for loaner weapons, I will actually like to start using and testing out using different grades of the nicer foam. So L200, L300, and L400. Because at this point, if a box is just made out of blue foam, it's still gonna die eventually. For me personally, the longest sword that I've had last for me is out of this exact build was about a year, basically from bifter to bifter. But I like seeing how long I can make things last. I made a sword solely out of L200. I actually made that in the Castle Angel garage, and that thing lasted me about 8 months. The reason is that the L200 it's the same grade as this blue foam, but the L200 is a little softer. And so it just ended up dying quicker. So the thing that I'm going to try is I'm going to try making the box out of different sizes of L300. Ideally, what I want to do is using 1/4 inch L300 for the thin part and using 1/2 inch L300 for the fat part. And then for the blade itself, using 1/2 inch L200. I think that basically it's going to come out as an oblong sword, but it'll also come out with a much better seal with smaller gaps than this build. And so it'll make for a much sturdier blade build that'll last longer. I just haven't decided to go to Foam Mart during quarantine because there's no point in making a sword if I'm just going to get to stare at it and not use it. But that's the next thing that I've been theory crafting. I've also been looking at I've been talking to like builders and stuff on different counterweights, and I have a few things that I want to try out. one of the weird ones is I kind of want to make a counterweight out of a rug.
Of a rug?
Yeah, I basically want to wrap my pommel in a rug, like a really funky like shag carpet or something like that, but something where the bottom of the rug, the hard part, is really, really dense and thick, and just basically use 2 nuts and that as my counterweight. Kind of, I wanted to make promotional swords out of this build, and the idea was to get like a really, really fuzzy shag carpet of that as the wrap for the pommel, so that it looks like pom poms.
Nice.
But there's some cool like different counterweights and stuff that I've seen people use, and I just want to try them. I've seen people fill the base of the pommel where the core is with silicone. So that's another interesting one. But there's a lot of them.
Nice.
And then one more trick that I forgot to talk about. If you wanted to really save on your kitespar, if you do decide to buy kitespar, and you wanted the blade build, but you don't particularly care about your handle being incredibly customized, and I'll have to look up the measurement for the actual PVC, but you can use 2 cores for the same sword. And how that works is you'll cut your kitespar just at the length of the blade that you need, plus another inch. And then you'll take Gorilla Glue and E6000, and there's a very specific type of PVC that fits almost perfectly snug with kitespar. And what you do is you'll E6000 and Gorilla Glue your kitespar into that PVC so that the PVC makes up your handle and the kitespar makes up your blade. And it's the build that we're actually using for Korban's loaners, because with the way that's built, if the sword's going to break, it's breaking at the handle. And all that means is you need a new piece of PVC. You don't have to make an entirely new sword. If you ever seen Attack on Titan, it's almost like the reverse of what they use to kill the Titans. Instead of the blades breaking and you have to get a new blade, it's the handle breaking and you just got to snap on a new handle. That's a little bit different. It's the same blade build. The handle build's a little bit different. But the idea is the same. You can still just really cool that you can also do with the golf clubs. If you want to use the nuts, but you don't want to take off that overgrip, you can carpet tape the very bottom of the handle and just stick a nut on. Carpet tape over that nut, stick another nut on, and then just tape them down really, really tight with duct tape. They don't come off. You might have a little wobbly of a handle or of a pommel, but it's not going to go anywhere. But yeah, that's another build that's for a handle that's really, really useful, especially for loaner weapons, because you save the life of your blade and you don't have to rebuild an entire sword just because, you know, some part of it chipped or some part of it died.
Neat. Does anyone else have any questions for Igua? Something deep down you really wanted to ask Igua, you just haven't had the courage to? No?
Igua,
Yes.
do you have anything to add before I stop the recording?
Nope. I'll put all the links for everything on the page. And Korban is the best.
It is.